brings up a really, really good point that I kind of wanted to delve a little bit deeper into, especially as it pertains to like secular parenting, is the idea, and just delving into sex just momentarily, the idea of being sexually liberated and expressive and having a healthy sexual lifestyle, and being labeled something like a prude or a hoe or a whore, right? So like when you come from a really religious background or some of these cultural practices that stemmed from religion, you get if you're sexually active in any way, shape, or form as a woman, you're a whore, you're a hoe, you're spoiled goods, you're dirty, right? And if you abstain from all that sexual stuff, then you're a hoity-toity religious person, you're prude or whatever. I don't know, Sunny, if you have this experience too, but like the way that I've always taught my kids is sex is good, sex is fine, sex is natural. As long as you're doing it safely, as long as you know what it is that you're doing, and as long as you have consenting partners or a single partner, like however you decide to do it, as long as there's consent involved. I think, and I don't know if all atheist or secular or humanist parents are the same way in how they teach sex ed to their kids, but the idea that it's not a stigma, that sex is not evil or sinful or bad.
Yeah, what about that? As far as sex education goes, I'll start with you, Sunny, and then I'll go to Caleb. But what was your perspective on that? Did you wait to a certain age to give your kids your perspective, or did you wait for them to come to you? How did you approach that?
Okay, so for me, it was always very age appropriate. When they asked, if they ask a question, they're ready. It's just that you have to give them information in a way that they can understand. One of the most important things that any parent, religious or not religious, can do is that when you talk to kids about body parts, that you use the real terms. You do not use ridiculous nicknames. And I say that as a professional working with abused kids, because if a child is going to let somebody know that they have been harmed, that somebody is hurting them, and they use something like, a very common one that I hear is cookie or biscuit, a teacher or somebody may not understand what that child is saying, because children do not speak in the same ways that adults do. So that's the first thing from that perspective. Another is simply helping our kids to understand that your private parts, they are private. They are only the only people who are allowed to look or touch them are the ones that you have given permission to. That's your private parts, and you don't show them randomly to people. People don't need to be seeing those parts, but that they are also natural. You have an elbow, you name it an elbow. You don't name your elbow a cookie. So, all of those things are important. And I'm kind of on a tangent there, but when it comes to sex education, that is probably the most important thing for the younger ones. And then as they grow up, you're honest and you're age appropriate. And like Laura was saying a moment ago, one of the hardest things I think for kids is thinking that talking about sex or having any activity surrounding sex is somehow bad, dirty, and something to be ashamed of, because then that leads to so many issues later on. So being honest and open, and that means that you have to get over your junk as and I don't mean that junk like, your own baggage. You have to get over your own crap and the stuff that you've had to deal with to be able to be there for your kids in whatever, where they are, whatever level that they are.
Right. Caleb. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to highlight something that Sunny just said, though, about like the labeling of your body parts appropriately. It's not just, I love what you said about like, it can be really confusing if you label it something like a cookie and then you go to a teacher and say like, hey, this guy over there touched my cookie. It's like, well, tell him to get out of your space, or your stuff is your stuff. And they don't realize the implications of what the child is saying. But on top of that, I think it really makes things taboo. Like if you're going to call a vagina like a hoo-ha and a cookie and make it kind of cutesy and stuff, it makes them afraid to use the appropriate words like penis and vagina, right? And it makes them feel weird about that part of their body. And it's funny that Sunny said elbow, because that's exactly the exact body part that I use with my kids. I'm like, your elbow is your elbow, your penis is your penis, right? But I think that it's part of demystifying like a body part that every one of us has, right?
Yeah, I agree with that completely, but I'm the one person here who doesn't have kids. K-lub, you do have a young child, and I suspect that he may be of the age where you haven't really delved too deeply into this sort of discussion, but looking forward, how do you see yourself going forward? Because I know you come from a fairly sexually liberal perspective and, you know, the way that your lifestyle is. So
yeah, no, that's very true. See, and the thing is I want to be able to raise my son in such a way where he doesn't feel the same sexual pressures that I did, because I felt like the sexual pressures that I felt were superfluous. They were not necessary. So things like if we're watching TV and we see a nipple, I don't want him to feel awkward because there's a nipple on screen. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we are very sexually liberal, and that's one thing that I want to be able to instill in my son, is this comfortableness, the comfortability, whatever the word I'm looking for here, with himself and with sexuality and with nudity unto itself. Now, that being said, I also recognize that we live in America with American culture that dictates what's acceptable and what's not in public. And as Bryce has made apparent, I have very liberal views on this. Like, if it were my way, I would be a nudist. If it was an option, I'd probably be naked right now. No exaggeration. Like, I think that this is liberating for me. I think this is freeing. I think that people need to just sort of shake this thing off. However, I recognize that I'm outside the norm on this. And
yeah, by the way, just to frame that a bit, I would say that you're outside the norm as far as Americana goes. But I mean, I live near the Bay Area, and there's a lot of, you know, there's people who are perfectly okay with nudism regionally. It's regionally specific, you know, so it kind of depends on the subcultures in America too. But you're right, it's a rare sort of thing. Generally speaking, people in this country are very uncomfortable with nudity and sexuality. I think it comes from religion, but because you don't tend to see the same thing in Europe, like in Sweden and Norway and those kinds of countries. But what do you think, K-lub? Is it religion that's done that, or is it?
I'm not sure. I don't know if I can blame that on religion, but I can say it's certainly a cultural phenomenon that I disagree with. I think that we ought to be able to accept the beauty that is the human body. I think that people are beautiful, and I think that I think that if, for example, I don't get like turned on at all times by seeing a beautiful naked woman. Like, that is to say, I'm not walking around with a constant erection just because there's a beautiful naked woman around. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that there's a difference between being naked around people and being intimate and sexual and in an essential sexual environment. And like, for example, an easy way to kind of put this into perspective is, you know, if you have a wife or a girlfriend that you know are pretty casual with, you guys can be naked in the same room and not be turned on because you guys are just doing your thing or going about your day or whatever the case might be. Mm-hmm. And I think that I think personally, we would all be better off if that's how we kind of treated everybody. And that being said, like I said, we do live in a culture that really shuns this idea. This is not something that is accepted. This is something that is shunned. You shouldn't think this way. And private parts are very private. And I want to also be able to recognize that when it comes to the sex talk, now, Bryce is right, my son is a little bit young to have had the sex talk, but I hope to be able to instill the ideals that as long as we have consent is the number one ideal above all else when it comes to sex. It must be consensual first, and then start working about with your other concerns. Consent is the first thing you need to be worried about. And beyond that, we can have more nuanced conversation as they come up. Sonny had mentioned that when they ask the question, they're ready. They're ready to have that conversation. And I abide by that. I agree with that 100%.
Right.